10:07.
Hold on a second, I'm sorry.
So I'm going to call the meeting to order.
Okay, I'm sorry, could you say the time again?
It's 10:07.
Okay, thank you. All right.
And, okay. Roll call, Fred Phillips.
Brad?
Here.
Okay. Barbara Evans.
Here.
Lee Warren.
Here.
Matt Hart.
Here.
Stephen Reinhardt.
Here.
Sean Emmerich.
Here.
Hi, nice to meet you. And Doyle Woods.
Here.
All righty. And TREIC staff.
Kristen Warman, Deputy General Counsel.
Gwen Jackson, Education and Licensing Services.
Michael Malone, Staff Attorney, Enforcement Division.
Mark Moore.
Jennifer Wheeler, Education Manager.
Tony Slagle, Government Affairs Inspector Liaison.
Mike Sampledale, Education Specialist.
Taylor Wood, Legal Intern.
And the visitors.
Ed Loran Jr., Lincoln Real Estate School in Dallas.
Sylvia Bassett, Champions.
Lloyd Carr, Director of Inspector Education, Champion School of Real Estate.
William Ball, DNS Home Inspections.
All righty.
Hold on a second. Is there anyone else on the phone? Okay, Brenda Roebuck was going to call in, so she may call in later.
So Brad's the only person on the phone.
As
right now.
yeah, that's right now. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, agenda item 2, the ratification of the meeting minutes from April 3rd, 2017. Did everybody get a chance to look at the meeting minutes? Was there any changes? Let's see. Okay, so make a motion to approve the meeting minutes.
Second.
And all in approval?
Aye.
Okay, so meeting minutes are approved. Thank you, Brad. Can you hear me or should I talk louder? Okay, I mean yes. All right, agenda item 3. General comments from visitors on non-agenda items. And is this,
That's me.
that's a non-agenda item?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Two different questions on there. You know, so-
Sure. So Ed Duran?
Yeah.
Okay.
You ready?
Yes, sir.
This is a question to the legal staff and also to the computers. I know in my case, TREIC has a problem with DBAs not being posted. How many of those have dropped off when TREIC changed the system over and got dropped off? You may understand what I'm trying to say.
Say that question. I've been
I
trying
noticed a lot of violations of people not having DBA posted on
Yeah.
TREIC. I know in my case, somebody else I had, it was on there one time, and when TREIC changed the system over, it disappeared, it got dropped off. Have you noticed that anywhere else?
Yeah, we had some issues. I mean, on the disciplinary actions database. That was
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about.
but some of those people were had at one time, posted at one time, but
Yeah.
got lost in time.
Yeah, there's 2 reasons why it would be off. It's if it's over 10 years old,
Okay.
or when we switched over from system, we've noticed some have dropped off. We've had to re-put them on.
Oh, okay, that's what, I noticed a big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, and one more question I had, I'm not sure. Wait, what the real thing there? It has to do with the exam, national exam. There's a lot of questions on there about contracts. Are you aware of that?
I don't know anything about exams, pretty much.
With the national exam,
Uh-huh.
has questions on contractual basis between the client and.
Oh, so you're saying that's a question on the national
Yeah,
exam about
People
contracts?
miss, our guys miss that a lot too, because George plays better than I can, but thanks for your time.
Okay, I didn't even know that was on the exam at
Well,
all.
our contract
So-
is contract, or, form is a contract, but
Right.
we have questions on that thing, so.
So
and
are
our guys
you,
miss it because they're not sure what they're asking, and and
so are the schools teaching about the contracts? I don't
We're trying
really
to.
know that.
Right.
Yeah, we teach about it. It comes up on the national, but what we try to stress to our students and get people taking the exam is that they got to be mindful of the ASHE standards versus the Texas standards. So when they're on the national, they got to be mindful. And as far as the textbook that we use, it's covered in chapter 1 of that textbook. So they just got to be mindful of not pulling the Texas requirements under our rules when they're taking the national side of the exam. I think that's where a lot of the confusion
Yeah,
comes.
that is correct.
Okay, okay. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your comments. Is there anybody else that maybe I didn't get the, okay. All right, so agenda item 4, reports from the subcommittees. Were there any subcommittee meetings?
I think the Education Subcommittee was the only subcommittee that met since the last meeting. Brad, I don't know if you want to talk about that, or?
Is Steve not there this morning?
He is. Do you want to, were you at that meeting, the Education Subcommittee meeting?
It was a couple of 3 weeks ago or so. It was all fun. It was a fun call.
I don't know if the, I don't recall.
Chair was there?
Well, I don't recall if the chair had been selected at that time yet. I think Greg was still the chair and he wasn't involved, so you chaired that committee, subcommittee, if I remember correctly. I don't think Mr. Reinhardt
Okay,
was
well,
there.
what we basically discussed was the education being accepted by the commission for non-TREIC approved courses from ICC and other agencies. And basically in our discussion and that no other courses, including the ICC, should or could be accepted under the TREIC rules.
Well, we were going to provide some information in terms of, if you recall, the subcommittee wanted to know how many inspectors had utilized that particular provision over the last couple of years, just to give some, clarity about how often it's used. Because I think you're right. The inclination of the subcommittee was because the inspectors are the only license holder that still have an exception, whether or not that exception was even worth continuing. And so we did do a query to find out how many license holders had used it, and Jen can speak to that.
Well, and we're getting in this is just the committee report. Aren't we discussing this on agenda?
Oh, yeah, I'm
six?
sorry.
Item
I'm
6,
sorry, I
yeah.
apologize.
I was about to say,
Sorry.
I think
Thank
that's
you.
agenda
Thank
item
you.
6.
Thank you. Sorry. And just real quick, Brad, the other thing you guys discussed was the ride-along course.
The possibility of making a query or some kind of a certificate, or not certificate, of the ride-along student by the instructor, and possibly something to qualify as a evaluation from the student to the ride-along instructor. I guess we had some discussion about possibly doing both of those, where we would go with it, how effective that would possibly be.
Well, and you'd also ask us to do a survey of the instructors and the students, and we've gotten some responses for that, and we're going to, we'll have those ready for the next subcommittee meeting to discuss what the implications of that survey are. We're just we're getting that information together and putting it in a format that's actually readable. But we have done the survey and gotten some responses. So.
And the full
Okay.
committee may recall that y'all delegated this issue, review of the ride-along course, to the education subcommittee. So that's the purpose of these discussions.
So a good response, or there's not that many ride-along instructors, so.
We got more instructors responding than students. We didn't get a whole lot of response from the students.
Okay,
Yeah. But we did get some responses from the instructors.
right. And I think at the time that we had the subcommittee meeting, you were still trying to work on the actual questionnaire. There was some formats that were
Right,
put
and
out there.
we got that done, and we submitted it, and I know there's some ride-along instructors here at the table that I'm not sure if you guys got the survey or not, but yeah, we sent out 2 different surveys, one to the group of instructors and one to the group of students who had taken the course over the last couple of years.
When you collate the data, can we see the survey questions?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Of course.
So you'll break it down by question?
Yes.
Right,
It's
I
just
don't think
not-
the
that's-
final form was ever
Was-
sent
yeah.
out to the subcommittee members that I know about that had the actual final questions in the format of
Yeah,
the, it was.
We finalized it
I thought
at
we
the
did. I
subcommittee
thought we
meeting.
did.
Oh,
I thought
okay.
we
Oh,
did.
that's
So
right. You
they
were,
kinda
that's
went
right,
through
that's
it
right.
and-
Yeah.
Yes, and there were some lessons learned, and we'll share those with the subcommittee as well.
Right, right. And how many weeks has it been since it was initially sent out to the?
What, a month ago?
Yeah, about a month ago.
And how long did you want to give it?
I don't remember. I apologize. I don't remember.
No,
what
that's
the time
okay. I was just curious. Okay.
Oh, in terms of getting responses
Yeah,
back?
how long did you want to give it before you said we
In
waited long
September.
I think they're
enough?
done.
Yeah,
Are you-
no,
is
we're
it
not.
done?
I'd say
we're
like
not
a week at
seeking
most.
Responses.
Okay.
Yeah,
Once
we
it
got-
cycles through their email, nobody's going to respond
Yeah.
anymore.
So, anyway, like I said, we didn't get a big response from the students, but we did get a better response from the instructors.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so, so Brad, is that all?
Good report, man.
Okay, any other subcommittees, standards of practice? Did you guys-
We have not met. I'd like to set an hour aside before the next inspector meeting
Okay.
to do our first, if possible.
Okay, and then the enforcement?
Enforcement didn't meet yet.
Didn't-
Can we just kind of re-verify who's on what committees again?
Yes.
I'm not
No,
poking,
that's
don't get me
fine. No,
wrong,
that's fine.
because now I'm
Yeah.
forgetting
so,
which one.
Education is Brad, Dr. Evans, and the chair is Steve Reinhardt. SOP is Doyle Williamson's the chair. Hold up, I don't know that.
I wrote down the
You got
chairs
it.
before I left, but I
He's got
couldn't
it.
remember how I.
Yeah,
I had,
that's
like,
not.
all these
That's
different
actually.
notes on who
I
I
don't
assigned
accurate,
to
Dr.
whom,
Evans.
as
I don't
was-
think that's as accurate as it's supposed to be.
Oh,
really?
But
Through my
unfortunately, what I sent out, I've been told is not correct. So enforcement is Lee, Matt Hart, and Sean Emmerich. That does sound right. Standards of practice is Doyle Williamson, Lee, and Sean as well. And then education. Oh yeah, this looks right. Steve Reinhardt. This is actually correct. It looks like Steve Reinhardt, chair, Brad Phillips, and Dr. Evans. So,
Occasion.
So Sean and Lee are on two different committees, right? Subcommittees?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay.
And then of course you can.
Yeah, that's
participate
why I
in
was
any
asking
and all
this
of them.
morning or last night.
Yeah.
Is anybody meeting?
So long as we don't have a quorum, you know,
Yeah.
it's.
That sounds good. Okay, so we will move on to, that's all the reports. We're going to move on to agenda item 5, which is staff reports from administration and management services, standards and enforcements, and education. So who would like to go first?
This is Kristen Warman, the Deputy General Counsel, and I'll start with the AMS report. I have a few items to report to you on. Just an update on the Legal and Ethics Continuing Education course. That course is now posted and available on the TREIC website. The exams for the course have been written and approved, and they are available to providers through our education department. So that course should be moving forward towards release and offering to inspectors on September 1st.
And we did send a Gov delivery notice to all of the education providers, making them aware.
And then in your materials, we have revised and updated the TREIC Real Estate Inspector Committee policies. This policy was last approved by the Commission in 2010, and you'll see the 2010 version plus a red line, and then the clean version that will be submitted to the Commission for approval at its next meeting in August. And basically, we have just updated the policy to revise and reflect current agency practices and policy guidance that this committee provides to the Commission. Then also in your materials, there was an inquiry that we received from a Texas licensed inspector, Stephen Nunley, regarding pillar-to-post franchise requirements. and this would be for their Texas inspectors. And Mr. Nunley sent his inquiry to this agency, the Office of the Attorney General, and to the Department of State Health Services, which is part of, or has been absorbed by the Texas Health and Human Services Commission. And the reason they are involved is because they regulate providers who do mold remediation and mold inspections. So anyway, Mr. Nunley was requesting legal opinions with respect to pillar-to-post franchise agreements and the requirements that they impose on their franchisees. We did respond to Mr. Nunley, and we also provided a written letter of advisement to Pillar to Post. You'll also see a comment back, an email back that we got from Pillar to Post CEO, promising that he would review it and communicate with his Texas franchisees to make sure that they were following our state law and the TREIC rules, including the TREIC SOPs. Because some of what is on the Pillar to Post website differs from what is in the SOPs and the other TREIC rules related to inspectors.
Reading through it, did it sound to you like he was going to take some affirmative action with the franchises? Because it just sounded like he was going to talk to them about it.
Well, and that's essentially what we asked him to do, because remember, we don't regulate the franchise agreement. And, to the extent that his franchise agreement is asking inspectors in Texas to do something different than what's required under state law, then the franchisees are exposed to liability, not necessarily the company.
It looked like they were overstepping the bounds more in the Department of Health side than our side. Putting a higher standard on them for inspections seemed okay.
Right.
But they were also requiring them to do things that required a license from Department of Health and Human Services.
And that was essentially the tenor of the DISH's response to him, was that, if you're doing these things, if your inspectors are doing these things, then they must be licensed through DISH's and they must comply with these standards that DISH's has promulgated.
Did it sound like, was he, the person that initiated this, was he a franchise holder who was kind of disgruntled that he was having to do it? I mean, it sounded like he was trying to...
I think he was
figure out a way to
concerned
get
because
out.
he was trying to serve two masters, if you will. His franchisor and the rules under the inspector practice and procedures and state law. So
I think he's a Pillar to Post.
yes, and he does seem to be a Pillar to Post franchisee.
He just maybe protecting himself.
I think perhaps,
sounded.
yes, just wanting to know what, if anything, TREIC was requiring of him to do. And, so basically that's why I copied him on the letter that we sent to Pillar to Post, so that he could then take that back to them and explain, look, I can't do this, and you've gotten advisement from TREIC, and if you force me to do that, then you're forcing me to violate state law.
Probably looking for ammunition because he's thinking, I have to go get this mold license and all this other stuff. Like I said, I think you're right. From our stuff, I think they're exceeding the minimum standards, so we're fine. But I think it's the other things he's going, I'm not so sure, because the franchisor is saying you have to have this all on your website. You have to have these options
You have to
available.
provide it.
And you have to be there. And he's saying, well, if I have to do it, I have to have these licenses as well.
I mean, that's
So I think it's
probably
clarification.
why
In this state.
their inspection
Mhm.
points are like
Mhm.
3 times,
Oh,
our,
yeah, they're insane.
whatever ours is, theirs is triple, for an inspection.
Because it's a franchise.
Well,
Costs
having
so
to do
much
all these
have
other
one.
things.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just wanted to let you know that we had received that inquiry and had responded accordingly. We also received an inquiry from the Board of Professional Engineers. They are another state agency that regulates and licenses professional engineers in Texas. And like TREIC, their statute gives them authority to give opinions when requested. They received a request from a professional engineer to render an opinion on whether an inspector must be licensed as a professional engineer to render an opinion on the performance of a foundation when conducting a real estate inspection.
I've never heard of that.
Now, run that by again, I want to make sure.
Basically, an engineer was asking if inspectors must be licensed as engineers to render a performance or render an opinion on the performance of a foundation. That's one of the areas that inspectors inspect under the SOPs when they're conducting a real estate inspection. Yes.
Thank you.
So essentially, the Board of Professional Engineers. Did you have something, Brad?
Hey, Brad, you're cutting out. We can barely understand what you're saying.
I think that was
didn't
okay.
help.
Recall. You want to call back in? It sounded like a bad connection.
See if you can type it in.
Yeah, if you want to type your question up, Brad, I don't know if you can. We can ask it here.
Keep it clean so everybody can see.
But basically, they contacted TREIC to ask exactly how we interpreted our rules and the SOPs. And what we explained to them is that the SOPs and our rules require inspectors to conduct a visual inspection of the foundation and to report any deficiencies that they observe in that visual inspection. And that our position is that an inspector does not need to hold a license as a professional engineer to render an opinion when they're conducting a real estate inspection. And when deficiencies are identified in the inspector's report, the typical practice is that an inspector will recommend the client conduct a professional to evaluate the foundation more thoroughly, just as you do when you find deficiencies in an HVAC system or a plumbing system or any other system that you're inspecting.
I know where this is coming from.
And, the Professional Engineers Board, having read our rules and reviewed them, was of the same opinion. And so we expect them to reach a similar conclusion and decline to opine that a license is required, an engineering license is required.
I'd be willing to bet this is coming because there's a large number of inspectors that are starting to use zip levels when trying to give the opinion of the foundation, which is a common tool that engineers use to determine, basically build a topography map of the foundation, determine variances in height and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there are some inspectors out there that are using zip levels that really don't know what they're looking at, and they're making full-fledged, saying you need repairs to this foundation based on this, and that doesn't necessarily mean that something's wrong. And I'd be willing to bet that's where that's coming from, because I've had 3 engineers call me about inspectors using zip levels and why are they saying that this is wrong when it's actually not wrong, and that type of stuff. So I've seen that coming down.
Unless you
the
know
pipe for a while.
what the original elevation was.
Yeah.
I don't know if it would, because slabs are not level.
Yeah, and my response to them was, if they're using a zip level, something that they're not trained to use, or a licensed engineer, then you need to go after that individual person, not necessarily the entire industry, because that's not what our standards tell
That's
us,
not what-
is to use a zip level to use it.
Well, it's like infrared.
We also have the issue with the contractors, the repair companies that do exactly the same thing. They use the zip level, they render an opinion on whether or not repairs need to be made, and they're not professional engineers.
They're sales.
The kind of
They're
worms that they
looking for
open us up, we have to
something.
open them up as well.
I mean, that
So is that something that, perhaps we want to write an article for the insight
That would be a good idea.
we put out and distribute to all of our license holders? Just basically saying that while you may use special tools when conducting your inspection, the SOPs don't require you to use special tools.
we know that.
And just a reminder that you need to be proficient when
confident.
using
Yeah, I
those
mean, there's a
special
liability there if you use that zip level, and I've told other inspectors, unless you really know what you're looking at, you really shouldn't be using that.
The zip level can be used as a tool to render an opinion, which is what we're required to do. But once we start telling the home buyer that a repair is required, then we're stepping into the professional engineer territory. We can say, we believe.
Can I make a
deficiencies.
comment?
Go ahead,
Yes,
Brad.
sir. Oh, sorry, are you?
Go ahead, Brad.
Unless I'm grossly mistaken, and I may very well be, nowhere in our standards of practice does it require us to make any kind of recommendation. Our responsibility is to report deficiencies.
Right.
Period.
Render an
End of
opinion.
story.
Correct.
Render an
Let's
opinion.
render an opinion,
We have to determine whether or not it's deficient.
an opinion on performance.
And a one-time visit with a.
But not
site
recommend,
level,
not,
You can't do that.
granted, do we always are required to make recommendations? If somebody wants to do that, they're taking that liability on themselves.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
I think what Kristen's point though, Brad, is that if we can do something to maybe make the inspector population aware that they're treading on dangerous
They're
ground.
going over a line.
And just put something
Yeah.
out there to
Yeah.
say, you know, these are the dangers in doing this, you know, that might be helpful. Some sort of article or something that.
Well, I don't disagree with that, but I just think we need to get back to the basics that nowhere in our standards are we required to make recommendations for repairs, and I see that on reports on a daily basis, and I think that's being put there simply and solely to protect the inspectors that are writing the reports, cover their southern part of their exposure, so to speak.
Well, Brad, if I see a foundation that has obvious signs of failure, I'm going to recommend an engineer or a foundation repair company take a further look at it. But I'm not going to do that if there's no evidence.
But you're going to say why you're doing it.
Absolutely.
You're
It'll be
gonna-
loaded in
Like
the-
Brad
in the
says, you're going
report.
to list the deficiencies.
Absolutely.
But you hand it off.
As an
But I don't
example,
mind exceeding the standards in any case when there's potential catastrophe involved.
I think what Brad's getting at is you can say, recommend have a professional engineer look at it, where people and inspectors, and I see the same thing that Brad sees, where he sees them crossing the lines, I recommend you do this.
Right.
And that's where they're crossing that line.
Yeah. The only thing we should be doing in this case in foundations is referring it up the chain.
well, and you can go the other way. This is an example, this is a home inspection report, a builder brought to me, it was done the 4th, like a week or so ago. And on the back patio, it's a brand new house, 6 months old, and you know they get those little hairline curing cracks. Well, it had curing cracks. Here's the inspector's comment. The concrete floor for the back porch does not appear to have the correct steel rebar installed to keep it from cracking. Multiple cracks are present that extend the entire depth. Recommend removal of the concrete and re-pour with adequate steel rebar to hold the concrete together.
My.
This is a recommendation.
That's in the inspection report?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I see that.
Okay, now this is on a 6-month-old house.
My.
And the lady that owns it, this widow lady, she,
Who's freaking out?
yeah.
Yeah,
She
of
just
course.
paid $300,000 for the house, and they got a home inspector that's saying they need to jackhammer out the back patio concrete and re-pour it because he's determined, he has somehow determined that the correct steel is not installed.
Couldn't have poured it on a hot day with extra water.
Well, I don't know. We inspected, my company inspected it. The city inspectors inspected it, which is very detailed. And he's, you know, I know the slab, I know we've been inspecting the building for 25 years. But the inspectors say things like that. There's notes in here, I mean, this is the example for the foundation. That he wants him to jackhammer the concrete because he is determined that the correct steel is not there. That's,
Well, hopefully he's there when they do the jackhammering so he can check that.
I think if those engineers, and I've told engineers, if you run into those issues, you need to address it with that individual inspector, because there's nothing from the state standpoint that requires us to use zip levels, to go off and say that we need these kind of, it's kind of like the guys that are using drones right now to get on roofs, or to do roofs instead of actually physically going up. If they aren't telling their clients, I don't walk roofs, I just use drones, and that first contact, then they're in violation. Because the standards say you gotta walk the roof. And if you don't regularly walk it, you gotta do that. But it's,
Well-
once they deviate, that's causing a problem. It's these zip levels and stuff like that are a big issue with it too.
Sometimes you don't know those things on first contact until you actually get to the house and realize that it's like a taller two-story than
Right, but there's
you can
inspectors that are
possibly get to,
promoting
you know.
that they drone the roofs,
Only
all
the-
roofs.
Okay, that's.
that they don't go
yes,
on.
Okay, okay.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I think that it's a great idea that we do some kind of an article that helps and just to reinforce our standards and our requirements for foundations and the difference between playing engineer and being a home inspector and advising them on.
Stay within the line.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Then we will draft an article.
How about the KISS method?
Sounds like it doesn't that work. Okay. Are you done?
Well, I was going to say that's a little bit different. too.
Yes.
I just, if I may just piggyback on the AMS report just real quick and just briefly mention that we have a special session starting tomorrow. There's not anything on the call that should impact us to any degree. So I'm not worried that, I mean, it's just, the legislature's in town, there's always worry, but I'm not worried that there's anything that we need to be that concerned about. If something pops up, obviously I'll let all of you know. But in terms of anything that passed the last session, there wasn't anything that impacted inspectors in particular. So just wanted to tie that up.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
So, Kristen, or do you have more?
Nope, that's it.
Thank you very much.
I have one question on there. On the standard statement of policies, I saw where they did update names, nomenclatures, and I think I heard you say there weren't any real substantive changes as far as the role between the inspector committee and the commission, as far as it, I mean, as best as I could tell, but yeah, the red line was pretty extensive. Trying to follow through, but it didn't appear it changed.
It wasn't
like when
substantive.
things come up,
It was just
goes through
Everything
the
got
committees.
moved.
Yeah.
Got moved
A lot
to
of
the
things
side.
got moved to different
Yeah.
spots.
As far as duties.
Duties, it just clarifies that we have an executive director instead of an administrator. That was just a nomenclature change. And then also that Carrie or myself can act and communicate with the inspector committee and review recommendations and give legal opinions on issues.
It looked, just for someone who tried to follow it through, it looked like it still had the same duties. When things came up, you took the recommendations of the committee.
Right.
Because there were some that are always afraid that would just be bypassed and you make
Right.
changes for us. None of that changed.
No,
Yep.
no.
Okay.
And this was in response when it initially was drafted to the change from a policymaking body to an advisory committee. When that happened, when the inspector committee became an advisory committee, we needed to kind of lay the groundwork on how the agency and the committee work together. And so that's what this was essentially. And it needed to be just tweaked and updated.
It's been 7 years since it was looked at.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. So do we want to do education and licensing next? I don't know what order. It's in enforcement.
Mike Malloy, staff attorney, that's standards enforcement. The first 2 pages is what we've done since the last committee meeting. It's about 10 disciplinary actions. Most of them are agreed order. There's 2 advisory letters there. And then, of course, the remaining is the year-to-date report.
Has there been any other word regarding follow-up on like the unlicensed activity and trying to go after them and getting the DAs to actually push forward on some of these guys and getting them?
They won't do that. We only have one unlicensed activity just in the past.
Yeah, the one in February.
Yeah. And that was an old inspector that allowed his license to expire a couple years ago.
Is that our plan?
No.
He's gone. He haven't had anything on that guy in a couple of years at least.
Is that your
At least send him out of state.
I put his name out there enough.
You did.
Probably caused an issue.
Those billboards help.
Education and licensing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This first report is on our fiscal year comparisons for applications received and licenses issued, as well as our renewal activity. And as you'll see here, we have a slight decrease, if you will, in total original applications that have been received over the same period the prior year, which is just a little less than 5% decrease, difference of 35 applications. We see that trend as we go down this list as well, just slightly fewer applications, if you will. The volume is not high overall. So when you do see a slight decrease or an increase, it looks larger than what it is. Under renewal activity, you'll see that approximately 77% of those who were eligible to renew during this period actually did renew, in comparison to the last fiscal year. However, do note that that last column to the far right at the bottom is comparison for this year, so that for 2015, 66.6%, if you will, who were eligible to renew did renew. So we're seeing that more license holders are renewing time.
So am I reading it right? We have 678 new licenses in this, so far this year to date. We currently have about 3,100 active licenses, so basically 20% of all active license holders have been licensed for under a year.
Well, what you're saying here is that we've issued 678 licenses, yes. But that's just original license.
Not renewals.
Not renewal.
Right. What I'm saying is, so we have 678 are originals. The total number is like, what, 3,100 or something like that. So basically 20% of the actively licensed inspectors have been licensed for less than a year.
Are new.
Hot market.
Yep.
And if you move to the next report, this report here gives us a total number of inspectors, so that the end of May, there were 3,784 total inspectors. Of those, you'll see that we had approximately 2,938 were for professional inspectors that are active, and there are 141 real estate inspectors that are active. These totals do provide for you those that are active as well as inactive. And also you can see that our totals this past year were at the highest that we've been for our inspectors. In May of 2016, we were at 3,496, and we currently have 3,784.
Almost a 300% increase.
Then the next report is the report on the inspector examination activity. Again, you've got a comparison of what it was May this year versus May of last year. We'll focus on the first attempt pass rate. Those are individuals who passed the exam on the first try. You'll see that we're at almost 34.5% for real estate inspectors, which is an increase over that of last year, and 47.8% for our professional inspectors, and that's slightly down. The next report is on our instructor distribution, and the bottom portion of this report gives you the inspector instructors. And as you'll see there, our totals are fairly consistent for inspector elective instructors. We've had increases over the year in qualifying and electives. slight increase in Texas SOP legal ethics update. We've got 52 now, and we've got 61 ride-along course instructors. To my knowledge, we have had no issues or problems with individuals not being able to get a course.
Do we as a committee, or even our education subcommittee, do we get the opportunity to review on a reasonably, every annual or every 2 years basis the exam questions as they go through? Because I know that we don't handle that.
Yes.
But do we at least have an opportunity to review and or input on some of those that are in there?
Yes, you do. As a matter of fact, this year there will be a meeting probably in September. For you all to at least take a look at the questions.
Okay.
Mr. Duran would like to
For
ask
the
a
inspector
question.
exam.
For the inspector.
The Texas portion, that's the state
Just the
portion.
Texas portion.
Just the Texas
Only the
portion?
Texas portion.
Right.
And it's not just the committee, there's an invite that goes out to subject matter
So it's an
experts. So
open
some of them are
meeting.
committee members, some of them
Not an
aren't.
open meeting.
Okay.
But
Not
it's,
anyone.
about 4 inspectors that sit down and some
Invite
staff go over the
subject matter
questions and
experts to
tweak them and see if they're necessary to continue. And we get statistics on how they're doing and performing and those types of things, so.
Okay. That's great that we get them on the state side. Is there any way that we can get any kind of input on the national side?
Do we look at the national?
No, we don't.
We don't have any say over the national side unless somebody is part of that entity that writes it and approves it.
Anybody can make a recommendation and inquire about a question to that committee.
I'm just kind of curious. I mean, it's been a while since we've taken the exam, but everything that I hear that's negative about the exam, there's obviously positive, but everything I hear that's negative about it is almost always about the national side. So I'm just always curious if we can have some input or at least see what's going on to find out if it is just really out of whack, or if there's something that legitimately might need to be looked at.
I could reach out. I know that on the real estate side, for the national portion of the exam, I think it's PSI that creates that, and they've just recently reached out to us and said, if you've got anyone that you're aware of in the industry that would be willing to participate in looking at the exam, please, provide us names. And I think Mark has set in on national. Or
Yeah, that was on the broker
that.
sales agents, not on the
Yeah,
inspector.
on the broker sales part. So I could reach out to, them and see when they look at the exam and, if we've got.
If we could, I mean, any
opportunity.
input that I think we can get on that from the local level, I think would help.
Okay,
Just at least the understanding.
yes.
Okay, Mr. Duran would like to ask you a question.
Gwen, is there a separation or difference between the first-time pass rate from the state and the national? Because my guys pass the national the first time, the state, they don't pass.
Yes,
Is there a way to put it so we can see it?
there are differences in terms of, and what they do, then they, you have to pass both.
I know, but if
portions.
you pass one, don't pass the other, is there a separation that says I pass this one, but not this one,
Right.
percentage-wise?
I could probably find that information out.
Thank you.
And I think we're right on something too.
Well, I was just
I'm
going to
sorry.
speak in reference to what y'all were talking about the national side of the exam. They put out a pretty comprehensive delineation study and everything that breaks down all of the questions and everything else. And I guess it was probably in March or April, I went to they had a kind of like an exam prep, in a sense, for the whole national side, and I attended all of that. So they got a whole query of information that's out there, and they're currently, what they do is they'll rotate new questions in, so as they get them approved through their board, then they just then feed in new questions to the exam, so they're constantly changing, so, but, so any input that y'all can give in relationship to that, and I think from the standpoint of the students, I think the biggest thing to them is the fact that it has a lot of boilers and radiators
Stuff that
and
you'll never
basements
use.
and all of those things, so they tend not to study those areas because they feel like it doesn't really pertain to Texas. So that's where a lot of that comes from on the national side of not passing it. So.
Okay, is that all from the staff reports?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, so agenda item 6, discussion and possible action regarding exempt CE providers, including the process for awarding CE credit from those providers. And this came up from the subcommittee meeting.
Yes, ma'am. And so that's what I was beginning to talk about in the report. I apologize, but we do have some numbers in terms of people who have taken part in that.
We do. This is Jennifer Wheeler, Education Manager. As you recall, this committee assigned the Education Subcommittee to look into the issue of whether we should or should not accept exempt providers. As Tony said earlier, the Education Committee requested that we provide information on how many students utilize this option over a period of time. And we were able to request ITS to run a query for that information. And what we were able to determine is that in the last 3 years, going back to June 1st of 2014, a total of 19 inspector license holders have utilized the exempt provider.
And that does not indicate how many hours they've asked for. So it
Right.
could be for 2 hours here. I mean, it's just 19 inspectors.
Yeah.
We don't know how, the extent to the number of hours they're getting through that.
As I think back, I think I was at that subcommittee meeting because I have to admit this.
It was an exciting meeting,
It's very memorable.
I have eaten since then. There's been a lot
Have you
going on.
slept?
But yes, the discussion was primarily around ICC and some of the
Correct.
national, and there was discussion about how those classes are approved by ICC. And I think you did call Birmingham or somewhere.
Yes, and that the information that we presented to the Education Subcommittee included the fact that, well, one of the concerns expressed by this committee was that the commission would have no oversight over the providers if we were to accept ICC-approved courses. Another important finding was that ICC does not assign expiration dates to approved courses, so they were approved indefinitely unless during an audit something were found to be incorrect, false, or misleading information. And that was he said.
The robot wants to say something.
Hey, Brad, you're breaking up again. I don't know if you could stand where you were standing before where you were clear, but we can't hear you right now.
Would you like to play a game?
No, and we also discussed the fact that when the classes are approved, they don't have an expiration, but they're not really, I was going to say, scrutinized as a class under your standards. There was a lot of questions about that.
There were questions about the standards, given the fact that we've just revised all of our design and delivery requirements for qualifying and CE courses, and there's no requirement that any provider that we exempt would hold their courses to the same standard.
Right.
And there was also discussion of relevance. Some of the courses that ICC and other potentially exempt providers would offer, the courses may or may not be relevant to skills of a real estate inspector.
I was thinking at the end of that, was there even discussion from us at the meeting on reevaluating that exemption?
There was.
We have it in there because
Right.
There was.
we really couldn't find, we were thinking that we really couldn't find any way to support any of those exemptions on there. And then the question came up, how many people are using it?
Exactly.
So that, I think that was to sort of
Yeah.
piggyback onto that to see
19
in fact
people out of over 3,000.
over 3 years.
Yeah,
the
over
3 years.
So the
I know
recommendation.
those 19,
Right. And then
2 of them
scale.
were me, so that's down to 17.
Right.
Well, and
And
if-
and typically, most of those probably contacted one of you, and then one of you contacted me.
Or one of
and then
us.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
If they had completed something and then maybe were
So
not
it sounds like
receiving
if,
credit for it.
if education or, if they can't support validating that those meet the standards, it wasn't going to be a big detriment to the
Yeah.
whole if those exemptions went away.
Right.
And I
so
think that
that's
was
what
the
our
reason you
recommendation
requested.
was to just make the exemptions go away and not have to have that discussion anymore because it doesn't really serve the majority of the inspectors continuing education.
And if that's the will of the committee, it's just a matter of repealing those sections in the rule that provide the exception.
Can you bring up that section?
I mean, the amount of effort that's been put into making everything consistent across the board for
Yeah.
education,
And
for
this
not
is-
only
this
for
just totally
inspectors, but for
goes
the providers as well. I just assumed it across the board.
Yeah.
Here it is,
Have
black
it
and white. There's
Parallel.
And it's a burden on
Yeah.
But the numbers answer the
staff
questions.
to try to make that.
Well, they'll never be able to keep up with the classes from, those providers that they're not submitting information. You have to require other ways to get that information to them. I don't think that's reasonable.
So this is an item we want to take action on today. If we can come to a consensus.
Don't forget to check your go-to in case Brad was typing
71
something.
little b.
Yeah, I thought it was in 70 a little bit. There's also. There we go. So this in 535-218F says, continuing education credit for a course offered by exempt provider. Inspector may receive continuing education credit for a course not approved under 535-73 if the course is offered by an exempt provider listed under 35.71B, and the commission determines the course covers the subject matter and is current and accurate. So remove F, and then remove the exception under 535.71B.
So who are the exempt providers?
Let me pull that up.
Exemptions
Right here. Following entities may offer real estate inspector continuing education courses without being approved. A unit of federal, state, or local government, or a nationally recognized building, electrical, plumbing, mechanical, or fire code organization. And I think the thought was, if you remember when we did the rule review, the real estate side removed the exception, and we had removed it on the inspector side. You guys had made an argument that no, that was necessary. I think the thought was more people utilized it than actually are utilizing it.
And we were looking at the number of providers on the real estate side versus the inspector side limited us.
Right.
I mean, we're outnumbered 50 to 1, but the providers might have been even a bigger ratio, and that we needed that. I really thought there were more people utilizing it, but and if in the last 3 years, which would have captured a renewal cycle for everybody, you're talking 19 people. Brad and I could probably name half of those.
It might only even be 9 people if you're considering it's 3 people, or 19 people in 3 years. You're looking at 2 different renewal cycles. Could just be the same
No,
9 people.
that's
doing it twice.
19.
Well,
Yeah,
it
something.
could be actually, because there were 19 total occurrences
Yeah.
where somebody was
So it could be
awarded
the same 9 people doing it
credit.
twice.
So we don't.
Different renewals.
We don't know if they're 19 unique.
Now, that's
people or not.
19 that got some hours, not how many people actually requested.
That's correct. It's 19 times that credit was awarded for a course taken through one of the exempt providers.
So it's likely less than 19.
Because I know there's a number of people that they've submitted and it just came back 0.
Yeah.
Because it could be one guy who submitted 4 different requests for 2
Right.
hours apiece.
Yes.
Right.
So at 19 is the absolute highest number of individual people it could be, but it's more than likely much
Likely
lower.
less. Yeah.
Okay. Wish I had some info from Brad, dude.
Well, check the.
I just.
Oh, you know
it's-
the message.
Brad, are you available to speak?
I'd be glad to speak on that.
Oh, you're good.
Okay, you're clear now. We can
Basically,
hear you, sir.
Okay, basically, what I think our decision to make a recommendation to the committee was to remove those exceptions and change the rule to where only TREIC approved courses would be applied and remove 535, where it was 217.
Yes.
18.
218F.
210, 18F. And I'd make a motion to do that.
I think that's what.
I would second that.
So do we need to have a longer motion to,
It's just, I would
Motion
say,
to remove those
Yeah, those
two
provisions of the rules.
Section 535, 218F, and 535.71B.
And you make a proviso for the date, because aren't some people already probably having these hours? So it will be retroactive?
No.
It wouldn't be retroactive.
Okay.
It would go into effect, it would be proposed at the commission meeting on August 7th, and then adopted at the meeting in November. So,
What you're saying is if somebody had already got them approved, but their renewal is not next month, you're not gonna take them away.
no.
no, yeah. And we'll make sure to notify people via the Insight, that the, you
Yes.
know, and all that stuff.
That would be a good place to.
It's consistent with the real estate side and everything too.
so we have a second? All in favor of removing?
Aye.
Okay, so motion passed. We're going to remove the exempt provider section. 535-218F. All righty. Item 7. Give everybody a chance to catch up on their notes. Item 7, discussion and possible action regarding direct supervision of apprentice inspectors.
Okay. So this was brought up, this had been discussed at a couple of different meetings based on some language that was in the legal and ethics course about whether or not a professional inspector can delegate supervision to a real estate inspector. And in getting the materials ready for this meeting, I pulled up the statute, and in fact, under two sections of the statute, 1102.001 and 1102.101, it is in fact allowed for a real estate inspector to directly supervise an apprentice. So it's not just
In the rule.
I'm sorry?
In the rule.
In the rule. Oh yeah, it's not just in the rule. So it is actually statutorily authorized that a real estate inspector can supervise. Now, they can't sponsor, it's a difference there, but they can, so the rule that allows a professional inspector to delegate to professional inspector to delegate to a real inspector is in line with the statutory authority.
As long as it's all the same, one professional inspector to their real estate inspector to their apprentice. It would have to be a direct line. It
Under
can't be
the same professional license.
Well, it's
Under
not.
the same
it's-
license of the
It's
professional.
not spelled out in the rule to say that, except for the fact that the professional inspector is, in fact, always responsible for that apprentice.
When you say delegate, you're just, there's no written delegation? When you say they can delegate, it just says that they're,
Well, to her point, what she's saying is,
it just says a real
if I'm a
estate.
professional, he's an apprentice, and Steve works for another company, he's a real estate inspector, technically by that, he can supervise him.
It's true.
Correct.
It doesn't
You're
address
responsible.
it.
Correct.
But I'm responsible.
Yes.
Which is not
Wow.
how it should be. To me, everybody should be in the same,
Yeah.
under the same
Under the same
license.
responsible.
That seems like a loophole
If
that
I have a
probably
real
should
estate
have
inspector and he's supervising my apprentice, I can see me being responsible. But if I have a real estate inspector over here who's directing my apprentice, one is, why would anybody do that? But if somebody does, that makes me responsible for you, and I don't know you. I mean, so why are
Well, but,
why are
you
supervising my
you
apprentice?
might know the real estate inspector.
Yeah.
For instance, in some of the rural areas of Texas, you might have a professional inspector and you might have a real estate inspector that is sponsored by another professional inspector, and it's a small community. Everybody knows everybody
He works
else.
for both
Right.
professional inspectors.
Well, or they don't necessarily have to work for both professional inspectors. One professional inspector may have his own shop and he's not trying to grow his business, and the other one is. And so he delegates, or he asks that real estate inspector to supervise, an apprentice that now he's decided to take on.
Now, it doesn't say that those inspections with that real estate inspector don't count towards his license, because he's not a sponsoring inspector.
Right.
Don't count towards whose license.
So the apprentice is getting
Of course
his
they would.
Yes, it would.
Yeah.
Yes, it
Right,
would.
Because of that statute.
Yes,
it would.
because you can
But that real
delegate.
estate inspector, so he's getting direct supervision from a real estate inspector.
Yes.
But it's not a sponsoring inspector, and the 25 are supposed to be done by a sponsoring inspector.
Right.
I think
Right.
by that statute, it still counts them.
It would still count.
I don't think it should, but
I
I
mean,
think
the
by the
part-
rule, it does.
Okay, so the rules for the apprentice, you have to have, like,
You add it on.
for 25 inspections,
Professional.
under direct supervision by a professional inspector, right? A sponsoring professional inspector?
The professional has to sign the law.
Because I've got both. Now, I have my apprentice, just for experience, go out with the real estate inspector and they do inspections. But for his 25 or 175,
That has
I
been-
got the impression those are under direct supervision by the sponsoring inspector.
This would allow just the opposite.
Yeah, this isn't clear. We need.
This would allow the
So-
real estate
Yeah.
inspector
So he could get his 25 and have done none of them with
With
his
you,
sponsoring
with
the professional.
inspector.
Who's
Because it really
supposedly
doesn't say.
responsible, completely
Where
responsible
is
for
the
everything that
rule
apprentice does?
that speaks to?
I could see that as a huge advantage in the rural
inspections?
areas, because if you're in another town and don't want to travel or have them travel to you for those first 25, and you've got someone you really trust,
Is it by
you know
statute?
well, and you're willing to take that liability
The
and that
25
responsibility over that
inspections.
apprentice.
I don't know.
Or I don't have to, yeah. I thought that one liner that said direct supervision could come from an
That would be the
inspector,
licensing requirements.
Was good in that he doesn't have to be wasting his time waiting for me. He can go out with a real estate inspector and just get experience. And that's how I,
Yeah.
maybe that's just my,
Who signs off on the, I guess my question is, who signs off on the log sheet?
Yeah.
The professional
Sponsor.
inspector is
But
the
which
only one that
professional?
can.
The sponsor.
The sponsoring.
that's why I thought only
Yeah,
the.
so that's the break
So
in the chain.
you wouldn't
Yeah,
have
yeah.
to do that, you just have the option to do
By
that.
the time I get his 25 inspections, he may have 100 under his belt. The other 75 are with a real estate inspector.
He would get credit for those.
No, but there's another
My whole issue
provision
with the
that
thing was-
speaks to supervision in
If
1102,
it's an
104.
apprentice,
Yes.
granted, obviously, we didn't know that it was in the statute before, but my problem is, I think the intent should have never been to have a real estate inspector be
And it
doing the direct
says,
supervising. It should be the
eligible
professional
for a
that
real
actually has
estate
the
inspector
experience.
license is performed at
200
least
inspections plus.
25 real estate inspections under direct supervision. There is no phrase that says
By the sponsoring.
by the sponsoring inspector, and that's in 1102, 108. So this would require a statutory change. This is not something
is something
we
we
can
can't
fix
do.
I don't
by
think
a
we should
rule.
change it. I think it's-
As long as, I guess, I always, I upgraded my standard to where if he didn't do them with me, they didn't count, but he can do them. Because I think when it first came out, I didn't know that was there, and about a year ago, I called up and realized that he could go under direct supervision with a real estate inspector.
Well, and there's also a statute that speaks to supervision specifically that Tony didn't include in the materials, and that's in 1102, 104 that's on the screen, that says that the person performing the inspection or preparing the report is under direct supervision if the person is instructed and controlled by a professional inspector or real estate inspector who is, and then you have the A, B, and C options. They're responsible for the actions of the person, they're available if needed to consult with or assist the person, and they're physically present at the time and place of the inspection.
So it's all three of those have to be, it's A, B, and
Yes,
C.
ma'am.
And they would, so that real estate inspector would also be signing off on his log.
Because he's at the inspection.
So if you see
He's responsible.
signatures from a real estate inspector who's not a sponsoring one on the log, it's still okay.
Because the real estate inspector is still sponsored by a professional, so the thought process is that it's there. I mean, I respectfully disagree with you. I think that should be changed, that professionals should be the only ones actually directly supervising apprentices, but that's not, obviously not something we can change here.
Well, the big problem is we have in Texas, a massive surge of the need for home inspectors.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, if we burden some of these outlying areas with this requirement, I wouldn't do it either. I would, if I was the sponsoring inspector, I would want direct supervision over the apprentice. But there are situations where there are other people I would trust to train them.
And there's not that many just inspectors.
See, that's the other thing, is how many, I mean, we have very few
Real estate.
apprentice inspectors. 137,
How many real estate inspectors?
140.
Yeah, see, it's a
it's
small
1 to
number.
1.
Yeah,
It's a small number.
They're a
I
team.
use it just,
we're talking less than 10%.
But this is a very difficult thing to change.
Yeah.
But we
it's
really
not
wanna
something-
Well, and is it
We
work?
can't change
Is
it,
it
it's a
work?
statutory, it's a statutory rule.
And most people go through the fast track.
Yeah.
and they go right to professional.
Right. And-
It's just I think it's good as an awareness thing.
Well, that's the reason it's on the agenda is
Is to
because we had
clarify.
the discussion and there was a lot of confusion at the table, including from staff, about what the responsibilities and requirements were. So we just wanted to make sure that we were
So
all
to
aware.
get started, he would, an inspector, an apprentice would sign up under a professional sponsoring inspector.
Correct.
And then he has control, or that sponsoring professional inspector has control over.
Who's supervising?
Yes.
Supervision.
Of course, it doesn't say, I mean, you said the sponsoring would delegate, but there is nothing that says that. What keeps that apprentice just taking off and finding real estate inspectors and the sponsor not even know it?
Well, then he's committing unlicensed activity.
Right.
No, he's out there
No,
inspecting.
he's unlicensed activity if he's not directly
Oh, it's,
supervised.
the statute,
No, I said he's out there with a real estate
The
inspector.
sponsor
Okay.
would
The sponsor
select.
doesn't know it.
Steve,
The real
the
estate.
statute requires the apprentice, in the license required in 1102-101, it's in the materials, he has to be under the direct supervision of a real estate inspector or professional inspector.
Right.
So he can't just go out on his own.
No,
But
I'm
he
saying
can go out and
go
find
out on.
another
Yeah.
real estate inspector here and there and jump
That he wasn't
around.
directed
So
to by
so
his
my apprentice could
professional.
take off and go with other real estate inspectors and I wouldn't even know it.
Well, you would still have to write,
Right.
you'd still have to sign the
You'd
report
have
as
to
the
sign
sponsor.
off.
And-
He needs to sign off
That
on what
inspector
you.
would.
No,
Now,
you're the
when he
sponsoring
comes to-
inspector.
You still have the responsibility, so you
Yeah.
still have to
That-
sign.
You would
That
still sign the
law-
report.
So-
At the
I-
end.
So,
Yeah.
Steve, if I may just point to this
They just
particular
said the real
aspect of the
estate
rule,
inspector can sign the law.
it says, at a minimum, a licensed professional inspector shall provide direct supervision of an apprentice inspector by accompanying or arranging for a real estate inspector to accompany the apprentice.
There
Right.
you go. There's the control.
There you go.
of it.
Yeah, you
Well,
would
and if
select.
you find out that he's doing that, then you can pull your sponsorship.
Yeah.
Just like a broker would an agent.
Exactly.
That's the,
Mhm.
that's the hook. Good.
I mean, I utilize, I had an apprentice, I didn't have enough time to train him, and there was another guy in town, not affiliated with me, but a professional inspector, wasn't a sponsoring inspector, so I told him, I said, you can go right along with him, get your 25 inspections. When he came back, I rode with him a few times. felt
Because,
he
yeah,
learned
the
it.
rule allows for that too, that you can delegate to another professional inspector to do that.
Yeah.
But, yeah, this is.
That works.
And I think that this was, now that we have all this on the table, we understand it, this was tied in to make sure there was a bit of control, or not a bit, that there was control from the sponsoring inspector about what they can, what their duties are for, under that aspect of it.
That works.
Generally speaking, 99% of the situations would go with the sponsoring inspector sitting at the inspection with the apprentice. It's just an ability that they could select if they have that situation.
But I can see in some of the big schools where, where Brian has 25 inspectors training them, you can send the apprentices around. That works.
So no action is required.
No, this was just to clarify that
This is-
conversation, kind of put it to rest so that we're all on the same page and that it is allowed, it's authorized under the statute and the rules specify sort of what a chain of command needs to be with regard to some of that stuff.
Insight.
That would be with these points, because they're not all in the same
And,
place.
yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Too bad they're
Yeah.
not all in one
Yeah,
area
and they're-
where you
they're
don't have to jump around.
close, but-
pieces of the puzzle.
But you could consolidate them on an insight, a few months.
Yeah, you can spread it out.
You get 6 months worth of subjects all along.
Yeah, I'm the person that probably is going to write these, at least initially, and,
While you're on the plane tomorrow.
yeah.
In your aisle seat.
Yeah. That's right.
With his cowboy hat on.
No shoes, no shoes.
Take shoes off.
So is there any more discussion on this item, agenda item 7? Okay,
Good.
so no action is required, so we will move on to agenda item 8. Discussion and possible action regarding posting photos from home inspections on social media. Do you want me to take this?
Yes, ma'am, this is the
Wow.
meeting now.
I got an email. Since I have been put as chair, I get all kinds of strange phone calls and emails. So this was from a lady from a title company who said she's in a small town up towards the Oklahoma border, it looks like, and she had noticed that an inspector up there was posting on Facebook and other social media accounts as it goes from Facebook to Twitter or Instagram or whatever, pictures of from their home inspections. You know, just small items about, you know, this is what I see and it's gone wrong. But it sounds like this one inspector kind of went too far, and people were able to identify the house that the inspector had commented on from the photo. And so then that got back to the homeowners who were selling to the sellers. And it was embarrassing because it was their mother's house. The mother had passed away. There was a lot of personal issues about how that made them feel with their house showing up. So I guess I just wanted to have a discussion about if that's something that we need to consider. I don't know about regulating, but maybe there's something, how often do inspectors post to social media? Is that something we all do? Is there a way to do it so that it's a learning experience for who's seeing your posts, but not necessarily a way to identify a particular home? And we shouldn't put addresses, and you shouldn't have location services so it identifies where you were when you took the picture, because that's easy to see sometimes if you tag it. So I just wanted to have that discussion about how to treat this and whether there's something that should be a rule or.
I don't recall, and I apologize, I should know this, but I don't, what the rule requirements are for actually giving someone else the report.
Well, you're not giving them a report.
No, I know that, but I'm just asking, what are the?
Have to have buyer's permission, client's permission.
Yes.
But aren't these photographs part of the report?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
No, I've taken pictures. For instance, I'm in an attic. Could be attic anywhere of a vent pipe from an oven or stove range exhaust that's not going through the roof, and you take a picture of that. Well, you can be very specific, and nothing's in the background, and most people don't even know what their attics look like. And you don't, of course, tag it for location. And that's a report that I probably took, a picture I took on my phone, whereas I use a regular camera, which has totally different pictures that I use in a report. I don't know if every picture I take belongs to my client. To me, they belong to me because I don't necessarily use them all. I only use the ones that are relevant to what I'm writing about in my report. So
The report belongs to the client, not the pictures all the pictures that you took as part of the report.
What if you incorporate the pictures into the report?
Well, if you're using a picture that's incorporated into the report,
Then it belongs to the
I don't know,
client.
maybe then
Do
that
they
would change.
own-
Unless you
I don't know about
specify
that.
contractually
Or does it
with
belong to the
you and your
seller?
client that no images taken belong to you as the report does, but they remain, whatever the legal term is, for ownership of that image. We would expect that people have a sense of what's right and wrong, but we just don't seem to see that anymore.
Right.
So I
And
think
not with
that
social, this is a
with
huge.
social media.
Yeah.
Huge, and it's not gonna go away. We need to think to the future about this because.
Yeah, and I think this is an
We-
important discussion to have, and maybe it probably won't be solved
No,
today, but I
no.
just,
That would be perfect, something in the something to talk about the ethics
Ethics.
class.
yeah.
But I mean, I personally think if you take the pictures, you probably are the copyrighted person that owns them. You may use them.
It's your intellectual property, I would consider it that way.
Yeah. Now, what you do with it probably goes into the ethical side. And I have posted some, but like you say, they have no way, very rarely, there's no way to figure out where that came from. Like you said, stovepipe, rotten wood on something. And it's in a training type environment, but yeah. And I saw the the note you had, use a toilet or something.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, anything that could be used to embarrass someone or things like that.
And even now, and I thought,
Well, it wasn't that, it's that somewhere else, the picture of the actual roof of the house or something showed up along with that,
Right.
and that was identifiable because I guess a roofer had gone up there, or sometimes inspectors do, and they put red marks all over people's roofs. And somebody knew whose house it was.
well, there's a certain, I know there's a certain law, because somebody is, I post stuff like that all the time, because I use it as an educational thing.
Right, right.
You know, I flushed the toilet, water came up through the shower drain.
Right.
You know, brand new house. You might want to get your new house inspected, type of stuff.
Right.
Stuff like that happens all the time. But I never put an address, those particular, I don't put the builder or what subdivision or anything like that. If you put identifying information, it's a whole different story. And even that, even the marks on the roof can be considered an identifying mark of that particular property. As long as you're putting the address, the client's name, seller's name, you know, any other stuff, you know, it's just, I mean, unless you're doing something derogatory.
Right.
You know, but that should also be between the client and the inspector. I don't know if TREIC should get involved in trying to police everybody's social media. I think that's a huge
It's
stretch.
It's an ethics
And it's
issue.
everywhere. Yeah, it's an ethics issue. But maybe,
I just got a question. In relationship to this, does the seller have any rights?
I don't know, since it's their
It's their
house, and that's who
property.
was embarrassed
See,
by this, was the seller.
I was always curious about
Yeah.
that. Does the seller have rights? Because you're
That's
taking
a whole
pictures
new
in their
area of
property,
case
it's
law,
their
isn't
property,
it?
you're just
I
a
mean-
guest of their home.
And the seller doesn't actually sign
Invited.
anything with us ever about that,
But
about
they're
us
signing
entering their
one-
property.
that we're signing
With our
over.
client, they've signed
Right,
a
that's true.
contract.
But it
with
doesn't say
us.
anything about photos, social
Right.
And the
media,
use of
reports, use of
That's another
reports.
completely wide open
Well, no, that's
discussion.
not
to
true.
have,
It's in
the
the
legalities of the
MLS.
inspector being on the property.
Well, that's
What
true.
can
The
happen.
same
It's in
pictures
the
of their
MLS.
house are all over
It's in the MLS if the seller allows pictures or photos to be taken to the property.
Yeah, but that's typically between them and the listing agent
Yeah.
and stuff like that, and how it will be advertised. It doesn't have anything in there in regards to us as inspectors, giving us those rights.
Well, and typically recall that if you're trying to sell it and you're posting pictures on MLS, those pictures are going to highlight
Right.
the benefits and the good things about the home,
Right.
not necessarily deficiencies that are in the home that an inspector might find. You know, so completely different perspective on the use of those pictures that are being taken. In terms of, you know, regulating the posting of pictures, you know, you're getting into First Amendment questions. You know, and if our approach is going to be that the inspector owns the pictures and they're not owned by the client, or you know, they're not, you know, the seller doesn't have rights in those pictures, then we're going to be pretty hard pressed to couch some sort of prohibition on posting them on social media without running afoul of the First Amendment. Now, we might be able to do something in our ethics rule and our professional conduct rule that speaks to this, you know, and cautions inspectors, you know, to think about these things. But
That may be as far as we can go. I'm not convinced the seller doesn't have some rights in this. Because unless I approve every photo you've done of my 110-year-old foundation, I don't know that I want it out there. I mean, I don't want, you know, I don't know this. I don't think we know this yet, do we?
no, I mean, I think we can do some more research on staff side and then bring some more information back to the committee at the next meeting.
It's an ethical issue to begin with, but
Do the appraisers take pictures of houses just under contract to go appraise a house and take pictures? No restrictions?
are
on
they
any-
posting them to social media?
They do, but remember, appraisers, typically that report is owned by the lender. Appraisers are working
Right.
for lenders. And those reports are confidential. The lender will typically give one to their client, to the borrower, but the borrower is not going to post, you know, the appraisal or the pictures on social media. And the lender is typically not going to be posting pictures on social
No,
media.
I mean, the appraiser, I mean, the same potential issue is they're out there going through the house to take pictures, have nothing.
There is.
They're not going in the report. They just took them while they were there.
You're exactly right, but this question has never been brought
That's-
to
that's-
the
I
board's
think we're-
attention.
Yeah, the whole mortgage issue in relationship to the appraisers is,
Specific.
I mean, that's.
But the fact that you have a stranger in your house
Yeah.
taking pictures,
But that will cover it.
and who owns those pictures would be the same question, I think.
It would. I mean, you still have the same issue on the real estate side, for the pictures that they post in MLS. It's just a different perspective.
Yes.
And how they never, ever match the property when we go to inspect.
This is true. It's
It's
that wide angle lens
It
you've
goes
got
right, this
going.
question I asked on Friday, that, talking about the lender, are lenders now required to give the copy of the report to the client or not?
Copy of what report?
They're not required to give it to their
Are they
client.
required to or not?
No, they're not
I was told they
required
were.
to.
You just have to tell them if there was one done.
Thank you.
But,
Thank you. I was told they were, because the new laws changed. Thank you.
I mean, they're not required to under state law. They may be required to give it to their client under federal law,
Okay, okay.
under the banking regulations.
Thank
You mean like an old inspection?
No, he's talking about an appraisal report.
And,
Get off the appraisal.
and the,
That's it, that's it.
and the reason, the other thing to consider here is that there's a difference between using a photograph for an instructional purpose and posting on social media to say,
Yeah.
ha ha ha, look at this,
Yeah.
which is kind of essentially what this sort of was.
Okay.
Right.
You wouldn't believe.
So so in thinking about this,
I mean,
there's
it could be interfering with the sale of the house.
no, I
It
mean,
could be lawsuit city.
I'm just saying that
There's
there's
jurisdiction on that.
Well,
I don't know. I mean, this part just
It's
part of the
part of this
larger,
discussion,
just part of the
yeah.
discussion. We need to think that there are distinctions between actually using them for a legitimate purpose, or what could be constitute a legitimate purpose, and someone just posting it on their Instagram to say, "You'll never believe what I saw in this house today," and ha 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 ha, look at this. I think the comment here was, yes, honey, I've tightened it or something like that.
one
And
more
there's
turn.
one more turn, and the base was cracked. So I mean, that wasn't instructional. That was the guy was posting a picture to be,
Cute.
cute. Yeah.
And my advice, because I didn't know what we were going to do with this as an agenda item, which she took, was to call the inspector, because maybe the inspector was unaware of their actions, and it looks like it got worked out, and he took the photos
Right.
down. Which sometimes is all that needs to be done, is most people just do things, and lots of people get excited and post a lot of stuff, and then all of a sudden they realize that
And a lot backfires.
I didn't realize I was hurting
Yeah,
somebody.
yeah.
And
Right.
so, but it is worth thinking that maybe it could be a discussion item under ethics, and
I think it's going to go forward in the future.
it should,
It's
because it gets,
in my
social
world
media
a
is getting
lot.
a little
And,
bit more intrusive.
You
than
you tell people, when in doubt, don't. But there is a thinking about this that's not connected to the world of the real world. You know that. I mean, I don't think that.
So we'll do a
issue's
little
gonna
bit more
go.
research, and we
Right.
can bring
It's a lot of
something
law
back
out
to the
there
committee
for your
their
private practice
consideration.
in the future. We can
And
investigate.
Tony, this might be something, that when we get more information, or if we decide that we're in a good place, that I could write something on for a future insight.
great.
And
That'd be
not
great.
put in any specifics about this, but just
Yeah,
sort
no,
of
that'd be great.
kind of a question of who's posting
Society's
social
changed
media.
as far as this, and we don't even know the legal repercussions. The law doesn't know. I mean,
Right.
that's why we have.
Well, there's other areas that control most of what was defamation,
Yes,
release
yes,
of personal information,
yeah,
that type of
yeah.
stuff, which has absolutely nothing to do with TREIC. My concern is I don't want this agency to have to start worrying about
Yeah,
policing
you
people's
can't.
social
We
media,
can't do
because that's
that.
just a
We just
huge
can't.
can of worms that
No.
doesn't need to be taken
No, we
on.
can't, and no one's.
I'm
being
sure
very
Mark would
effective.
welcome the influx of cases in the enforcement
No, I
division.
think Tony should write an article.
No, I do think that
I think it's a
I do
YouTube
think
video.
that we can provide some guidance and sort of best practices type of things. I think that's
Just really be thoughtful.
The only thing I think we can do from a TREC standpoint is the ethics side and professional conduct.
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
professional conduct requirements that you have to
Exactly.
perform your business ethically and whatnot. And if people are doing stuff that crosses that line, then we can intervene.
Think
at that
about the
point.
purpose.
But to go in and,
Just
start
for-
opening that can of worms where we got to what can or can't you put?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all going to be very subjective.
Yeah.
so.
I mean, the ethical rule already kind of addressed this. It talks about treating clients and other
Yep.
people in the industry fairly, and this could go to this,
Right.
like an article just
Yeah,
speaking
yeah.
to that, so.
Awareness.
Okay. It is a 9-hour flight.
I just wanted to back up a little bit to the best practices. I mean, that's what we deal with every single day in our profession. And so you have to think about keeping your social postings and your professional completely separate. I mean, it's your job, your responsibility to your client, to the homeowner, to the real estate agent. You shouldn't be going out there and acting like, I don't know, you're posting pictures of your puppy and making jokes
I mean,
about it.
ask me how many teachers are in trouble right now across
Yeah.
the street with me. Yeah, it's just, Scott, keep it separate.
Well, and Mike is right. The ethics rule does speak to this generally. It says the inspector should deal with the general public at all times and in all manners in a method that is conducive to the promotion of professionalism, independence, and fairness to the inspector's business, and the inspection industry. So that's one provision. The ethics rule also has a provision that says the inspector should conduct the inspector's business in a manner that assures the client of the inspector's independence from outside influence and interests that might compromise the inspector's ability to render a fair and impartial opinion regarding any inspection performed. I mean, if you're posting pictures on social media about something, are you really being fair and impartial when you're performing that inspection? So
I think it depends on how it's portrayed in the post.
exactly.
Like I said, in that particular one, it's a ha-ha thing. Okay, probably not the smartest thing to do.
Right.
But if it's instructional, like Steve was saying, that's a different issue.
Or if you take that same picture and say, hey, if you're doing it yourself and it's all in the toilet, just be very careful not to twist too
Right.
tight because this is what could happen. That's completely different than what.
Well,
what he
and
posted.
what it turned out was the comments about it were worse that the people made behind the picture.
They always
So
are. They always are.
That's what really turned it into
Yeah.
a really mean-spirited sort of, and I don't think
Pull
the
the
inspector
feed, my gosh. Oh,
thought that would happen.
Pull the feed.
Well, and when you post a picture, you really have no control over what somebody's going to post back in the comments. And, then that sort of puts you on the hook for, monitoring, well, what are in my comments? Do I, maybe I should take that down. I don't want.
And that's each person's responsibility.
Right.
Okay, so we'll figure out some stuff and bring it back, and an article would be good too.
Right,
So
right,
just
yeah.
kind of spelling out some.
Yeah, I can put that on my list and let you edit it.
Sounds
We don't
great.
want you
It'd
to
be
work the
something
whole
to-
time
just
you're
put down-
gone,
Put down on
Tony.
paper, I can do that and just
That's
see what
amazing.
we're
Okay.
thinking, if it's something for a future discussion. Just as a
Awareness.
reminder to inspectors that, you owe it to your clients and the sellers and your business.
And their own
to-
dignity. I like to think
Yeah.
all inspectors have the dignity that you guys do, but apparently not.
People are people.
That caused him to choke.
That's the D word.
So on to agenda item 9, discussion and possible action regarding amendments to 22.
I can start. You can.
Do you want to? Okay.
Sure. This issue came up. We were contacted when essentially an inspection had gone wrong, and there was a lawsuit involved against the inspector, but the inspector's insurance policy had what is known as a defense within limits or wasting clause in the policy that basically allowed the money obtained under the policy to go towards his defense first, which left nothing to reimburse the client for any damages that occurred or were not reported or that were awarded in the lawsuit. And the purpose of the statutory requirement that inspectors have some type of bond or insurance policy is that that money be available to reimburse the consumers out there. And so essentially what we have done, what Tony has done, is to work with the Department of Insurance to amend our certificate of insurance that basically says an insurance agent, when you're writing this type of insurance, you can't include those types of clauses, that those don't meet the statutory minimum requirements. And then we have also proposed an amendment to Rule 211 that basically lets our license holders know, when you're seeking financial responsibility and you need to meet that statutory obligation, you can't use those types of insurance policies to meet that obligation.
Yeah, there's a statutory obligation to have a minimum of $100,000 aggregate, and when you have a defense within limits policy and it goes below that, then you're not in compliance with the statute anymore.
Right.
So, and the legislature has directed that this is a minimum requirement, and so every policy has a duty to defend the person, but that's separate from the actual limits of liability. And when they start, what they also call it a cannibalizing policy, it starts to cannibalize the limits, then you're no longer in compliance with the statute.
There's some builders now are requiring $1 million policies to inspect their houses.
Yeah.
It's just,
Home builders.
Yeah.
builders are getting crazy right
Now, and the reason, just so you know, the reason we tied it to the statutory limits as well, rather than just make it a blanket prohibition, is so that if you're going above those limits, you still have an option of an inspector to work with your insurance agent or your company to have clauses in there. The only requirement is it cannot go below the statutory minimum limit of $100,000. So you still have the ability to use those clauses if you want
You just have to bump it
but you're
off.
not going to be in compliance if it goes below $100,000. You have to maintain that $100,000 minimum.
So to your point, Lee, you could have $1 million policy that had a defense within limits up to $900,000.
Yeah.
No, this is builders that are trying to find a way to prevent third-party inspections from being done. So they're creating all of these requirements that they're not telling their clients up front.
Okay.
So all of a sudden, their client signs a contract, they have a non-refundable $30,000 deposit that they put down in this house, and we're gonna get a third-party inspection, and they go, oh, by the way, they just need to fill out this form. And it's requiring $1 million policies, can inspect between Monday, you only Monday through Friday from 7 to 3, you can never get on the roof.
We have
You
to defend those on site if there's a lawsuit. We have to defend the builder.
If you get hurt
That's crazy.
on site, even through the builder's gross negligence, you can't hold them liable.
Well, that's-
I mean, all this stuff that most inspectors are not gonna
That's a little
sign,
crazy.
what the builders are doing right now.
And so they've signed a contract with the buyer that requires the buyer to hire an inspector that will meet
No,
those.
the buyer
requirements.
signs a contract with the builder, and they go through the whole process. The contract says you can get an inspection. So they say,
Okay.
great, I can get an inspection. And then buyer says, I'm ready to get this inspection next week. The house almost done. Perfect, you can absolutely get an inspection. They just need to do all this.
Because they want them to use the
Is
builders.
that part of the contract?
They don't
They don't
want
want
they don't want it
it.
inspected.
Yeah,
They're
it's
basically
to
making it
discourage.
difficult to get a third party.
So they include that in the contract?
No.
Yes.
No. It's not included in the contract. In the contract, it just states you are perfectly within your rights to
How do
get.
they legally enforce that? if
They say it's a company policy.
I understand
That you
there
have
to be
to
a
fill all this.
form that they do sign. This says
Is
they
it?
have to use inspectors that have followed these particular
Some
requirements.
require you to be ICC.
But that might have just been one
code
builder at a
certified.
time.
It just doesn't
Yeah.
seem like there's very full disclosure of
There's-
what they're
There's not.
asking. Yeah.
Usually
Right.
it comes
Very
down the
difficult.
day
Yeah.
before the
Yep.
inspection.
It's very dangerous.
When the inspector shows up and the superintendent, he goes, you're not on our list
Yep,
of
sorry.
approved inspectors. 'cause
I've
you
just,
And
haven't
it's
I've just done the
4 o'clock,
inspection
not
when a
5.
case occurs. I just push through it. What are they gonna do, kick you off, call the police?
Well, they can. It's their property, not their
They
buyer's.
haven't.
Some inspectors will tell them to wait until they sign in, and then they'll come and do it the next day after they've closed, and then turn it in.
Right.
Under the
So-
warranty,
Under the
yeah,
one-year
they may as
warranty
well.
thing, so-
Then you're
That's-
safe.
Yeah.
And who wants to work with a builder that would do this?
They don't know what's happening until it gets to
Right.
that point.
I mean,
Right.
most people don't ever know what they're getting themselves into.
Right.
No one reads those contracts.
And the market's so crazy, builders get away with
Right.
it, and builders aren't licensed.
Right.
Well, and the builders aren't going through those provisions in the contract with that buyer. They're just like, here, sign on the dotted line, you want my house.
And if you want somebody to do that, get your own real estate attorney to help you with that,
So that's where a lot of this
So,
insurance stuff has come up too, because it's the
So,
excess.
so my question is, Kristen, on this line item, have you had a lot of issues with specific insurance companies that are having this wasting clause, or I don't even know if mine does.
We don't know. We just
Yeah.
got,
We
we got
don't know,
indication
we've
from
just
one
had
person.
a couple of inquiries
Okay.
about it.
And
Okay.
in talking to TDI, the type of insurance that you guys are required to have is ripe with these kind of clauses.
So we need to.
And the issue is the minimum limits, the statutory limits, and that's the thing, because the legislature said, look, you gotta have these limits, and then when you have a wasting clause, you know,
So basically, we found a loophole that interferes with the statute, and so we're closing the loophole.
Correct.
And it may already be in effect for half your inspectors.
I was just
have
thinking
no
that.
idea.
Never know.
Yeah, I don't
well,
agree.
and this is, again, isn't retroactive. I mean, upon renewal, you need to, you'll need to get, because you have to provide a certificate of insurance at renewal, correct?
Uh-huh.
To prove
Yes.
that you've done this.
You get that
So-
A corp, yeah.
That you've
Yeah,
had
so-
continuous coverage.
And that's the other thing. So once we get a motion and a second or whatever, and you guys approve it, if you approve the language, we also have the form. The form gets sent to the Department of Insurance for their approval and gets posted on their website for companies that are writing this type of insurance to use as a certificate of insurance that they can give to license holders to supply to us as proof of.
So in theory, our
financial
insurance company should know when our next renewal comes up. Hey,
They
by the
should
way,
know,
we-
and that's why it's bullet pointed in here. So I believe this is okay. We still need to get approval from TDI, or not, they need to approve it, so they may come back and tweak this last line a little bit, but essentially the gist is, it'll have something in here on the certificate of insurance that says you cannot reduce the required limits of liability. So,
Let me go ahead and make a motion. Let's move forward with this. Make a motion to amend the certificate of insurance and
Just a quick question. So
if
let's just say
approved by,
Hang on.
clause in their
approved by
insurance.
Hang on, Brett.
Department of Insurance to go forward.
okay. So,
I'll second that motion.
okay. And then,
And then,
Discussion.
Now we
Just
can
a quick closing the question.
Uh-huh.
For those people that they have insurance and have exclusionary clause in it, are they liable for it? They don't know what they're doing?
yes, basically it says that they would have to come up with the difference of whatever the.
So should we put a post something in the inside to let them know that they might, you know?
well, this has got to be, the rule and everything's got it goes through the same process. And again, as I said, it only affects policies that are being renewed. It's not, if you already have an insurance policy in there,
Okay.
but this should put the agents and the companies on notice that the wasting clauses are no longer allowed. I mean, they shouldn't have been in the first place. The argument from TDI is they've always been in violation, but we needed to clarify it.
Right.
That they've never been.
And that would be true.
Yeah.
That would be TREIC's position, is that if you had a policy with that clause, you've been in violation of the statute and the rules all along.
We don't know that as an inspector, you know, we.
Technically, we should.
Well, you should know it because that's what's in the statute and that's what's in the
Yeah.
rules.
And typically, it's a matter of premium. So if your premium, they'll say, here's what it is, but if we put this clause in here, your premium will be this. So you should know about it.
So if you have a
But-
low premium, most likely you
You
have.
might, or you might
You
just-
might have a policy
Yeah.
like this.
Or you might just have a good insurance agent.
Or that, yeah.
Check the policy tonight.
So,
Okay, so we had a motion and a second.
yes.
So all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, so discussion on agenda item 9. Is there any way, I forgot to welcome Sean Emmerich and introduce him at the beginning. We were going to do a bio, so I'm out of order here, but I just want to.
I believe, yeah, and I think you asked me to submit, I apologize.
I just realized that I
That was
keep looking at him going, and he's
I-
listening to him talk, and I'm like, I didn't even introduce him or do his bio.
She did ask me to provide your information, and I didn't, so I apologize. So,
And I was late, so I messed it all up.
Dun, dun, dun.
Okay.
Yeah, feet to the fire.
Agenda item 10 is request for future meeting agenda items. So from today's discussion, I'm trying to think of anything. We didn't really have any subcommittee items that are coming up. CE.
Well, I think we'll come back with information on agenda item A.
Right, the social media. Does anybody else have anything that they, at this time?
I had a question, and somebody's brought this up, and I may have asked you once before. On the pocket, on the posted pocket SOP, if there are errors in that, how easy is that
It's easy.
correct?
It's easy to correct. Just let me know what they are.
Okay.
Are there errors in it?
Well, it does, there is an SOP one in there, and I think I brought it up once before, where it says it is a deficiency to have water pressure over 80 PSI,
Uh-huh.
which is not in the SOP.
It's not in the
Never
SOP.
has been.
And that's in the pocket
Yep.
edition? Because that's straight from the
I
current
know.
rules.
I brought up the SOP right
Okay.
off the website and looked at the pocket.
If you don't mind waiting after the meeting so you can point it out to me and I'll fix it today.
Sure. I did, I thought it would be easy, because I've had people that
Yeah.
have questioned.
Okay, so I do have a quick question. For the commission meeting on the 7th, the items from here that are going to that for approval, is agenda item 9 going to be on that also?
Yes.
Okay, so item 9 and item 6.
6, and then the policy.
That was part of the AMS.
That was part of the AMS report.
Okay, that's right, that's right. Okay. Alrighty, so any other agenda items? Brad, any agenda items?
That was no.
No, this time. Alrighty, so, agenda item 11, discussion of future meeting dates.
Did you want to talk, since you have everyone here, about the SOP, or do you just want to do that later?
We'll do it later.
Okay.
Okay, and future meeting dates.
Brad, I'm sorry you're breaking up again. I think you're asking about the commission meeting. I don't know. It's on August 7th, if that's what you're asking.
It's battery one.
So I don't, do we need to go as far out as September? We don't need another one in August, so.
No.
September should be our next one, right? Or
Probably
October.
October,
November,
because
we have to do it before the November.
the commission meeting
I don't
would
know.
be November 13th. That's the day it would normally be scheduled for.
So we should.
So this committee should meet, in October.
Okay.
About the night.
It's
The
Columbus
9th
Day.
is
that a
Columbus Day.
holiday?
I don't remember what that is in terms of our.
Plan on going to the bank that day.
I don't know, I just don't know if it's a holiday for TREIC or if it's.
We're open.
You're open?
We're open on
The only ones
Columbus
that actually
Day.
close that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, we're open on Columbus Day.
It's Veterans Day we close on.
Oh, okay. So does the 9th work for everybody here? Okay, it does for me. What
9th
about
of
TREIC
October?
staff? October 9th.
October 9th.
Yes. 10 a.m.?
Sure.
And then any.
Ninth is good for me.
Thank you.
Brad.
And then any subcommittee meetings we can.
Yeah, I'd like to schedule the standards of practice meeting an hour before, so 9 o'clock.
9 a.m.
And that's, let me just ask this, there's not going to be anything to move forward to the full committee tonight?
Right, just
To kind of get things,
get things started and
Okay.
maybe discuss new agenda items.
okay.
And then, I forgot what I was going to say.
She let me in.
Okay.
Sorry.
So October 9th,
Yes.
10 a.m., that's good with everybody. So we're going to go ahead and make that our future day.
Okay.
And then will we meet again in December or before the end of the year?
Yeah, we'll meet at some point. Well, the next one would be
February.
February when you
February.
when you elect the officers.
Okay, that's right.
Mhm.
It's typically when we do it. unless there's something major coming up, usually the February meeting's sufficient to talk about things.
Okay.
We have met before that, but it's usually,
And we still have one opening?
we have a
for
public member.
Public member.
So if anyone here knows of anyone who's a member of the public, not an inspector, or any other type of real estate license holder that would be good, please let us know. Have them submit a resume to me
Remember they met?
or to Doug and
Okay, so we have our future meeting date is on the 9th, and we'll have an SOP meeting at 9 a.m. on the 9th. And so we will move on to adjournment. Agenda item 12, and it is 11:51.
all right.